Hello, folks. Thank you for tuning in to the Federalist Files. We're going to be going over Federalist number 69 today. It is titled The Real Character of the Executive. It's written by Alexander Hamilton, March 14th, 1788. Topics include the President's qualifications, impeachment as a check on the executive branch, comparison of presidential power and the King of Great Britain's power, and the President is to be the Commander-in-Chief. So this paper I wrote down, I put a little star next to it. It's, in my opinion, it's considered pretty significant. Kind of gives a real introductory to the power of the president, and it compares it to the power of the governor, who is the executive of New York, as well as the king over in Great Britain, which was their version of an executive, but he's just pretty much a hereditary monarch. So this paper was pretty long, as well as the next paper we're going to be doing later this week. Federalist number 70 is also going to be a very long paper. So this one I tried my very best to cut it down as much as I possibly could. I'm going to try to get through the content within hopefully about 30 minutes. So in this paper, Hamilton, he outlines the real characters of the proposed Constitution. First, the executive authority, with few exceptions, is to be vested in one single magistrate, as in the president. That's supposed to be the executive. The president is to serve a term of 4 years and can have unlimited terms dependent on the confidence of the people. Now, this is a provision that no longer exists. Now, they have a 2-term limit ever since FDR, because he was president for about 4 terms, so almost 16 years. So additionally, the president needs to be a minimum age of 35 and needs to be a U.S.-born citizen. Now, Hamilton notes, he's going to kind of go through this a little bit. He states, and I quote, "That magistrate is to be elected for 4 years and is to be re-eligible as often as the people of the United States shall think him worthy of their confidence. In these circumstances, there is a total dissimilitude between him and a king of Great Britain, who is an hereditary monarch, possessing the crown as a patrimony descendable to his heirs forever. But there is a close analogy between him and the governor of New York, who is elected for 3 years and is re-eligible without limitation or intermission." So, what's pretty interesting about this is now we have this, when we have 2 terms for president, now we have that limitation. I don't necessarily know. That limitation, in a way, is bad, because then at the very end of your second term, then you have a lame duck presidency where you can pretty much do whatever you want. You don't have to worry about the ramifications. You don't have to worry about the people electing you in the next election. I'm also a fan of term limits for House of Rep members and Senate members. I think if you're going to go with term limits for the president, you should also equal it out and have it in the Congress as well. That would make the most sense to me, because they do hold a good amount of power in the legislative branch, and we really do need to get some of these machine politicians out of there, like Mitch McConnell's of the world, the Lindsey Graham, Senator Warren. I mean, all of these people just need it. They need the older Bernie Sanders. Just get them out. We need them out. We shouldn't be making being a politician a career choice for somebody. So to go on, next he states, "If we consider how much less time would be requisite for establishing a dangerous influence in a single state than for establishing a like influence throughout the United States, we must conclude that a duration of 4 years for the chief magistrate of the Union is a degree of permanency far less to be dreaded in that office than a duration of 3 years for a corresponding office in a single state." So he's kind of drawing the comparison between New York. The governor does 3-year terms, and then if that's okay in New York to have a 3-year term, and the governor of New York has more power than the president, then the president doing a 4-year term should be no issue. It should be no problem. And that's the reason why he draws the comparison between the two, because all of his dissenters are people that have pretty much put together the government over in New York at this time. So next he goes on to state, and I quote, "The President of the United States would be liable to be impeached, tried, and upon conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors, removed from office, and would afterwards be liable to prosecution and punishment in the ordinary course of law," end quote. So this is pretty much just a safeguard on the Congress, on the other branch, on the Supreme Court, the judicial branch. It is just a safeguard holding the president accountable, and they can be impeached over these things. So once they're impeached over bribery, treason, high crimes, or misdemeanors, they're removed from office, and then now they are also liable for prosecution and punishment in a criminal case as well. So this would work as a check and protection against tyranny. This provision is not present in Great Britain, where the king is immune to criticism, where he can only be overthrown through a national revolution, which is very important to note. So he goes on to state this, and I quote, "The person of the king of Great Britain is sacred and inviolable. There is no constitutional tribunal to which he is amenable, no punishment to which he can be subjected without involving the crisis of a national revolution. In this delicate and important circumstance of personal responsibility, the President of Confederated America would stand upon no better ground than a governor of New York, and upon worse ground than the governors of Maryland and Delaware," end quote. So he's just kind of, once again, drawing the comparisons between the different positions in government at this time. So next he goes on to state, and I quote, "The President of the United States is to have power to return a bill which shall have passed the two branches of the legislature for reconsideration, and the bill so returned is to become a law, if upon that consideration it be approved by 2/3 of both houses. The King of Great Britain, on his part, has an absolute negative upon the acts of the two houses of Parliament." So this kind of this explains that this is the power of veto through the presidency. So if you get a majority vote in the House of Representatives for a bill where it's written, then it goes to the Senate for confirmation. You get a majority vote there as well. It goes to the president's desk. The president can veto it, send it back to the two chambers of Congress. Now, if 2/3 of each chamber agrees, then that is an overriding of the veto, which we recently saw. I believe the defense bill recently, when Trump was the president, got overridden because he said it didn't have. They changed the provisions to be able to pull out of Afghanistan. I've mentioned this is something that has gotten a little. No one has covered this in the media. The only reason that Trump turned down the last defense budget bill is because it did not allow him to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, and it gave the discretion of the Congress to allow him to do this action. And he said that's unfair because I want to pull them out pretty much, in a couple of months. And now we see, look who is in Afghanistan. We're stating that we're getting out of Afghanistan, but Trump was supposed to be out by now. He would have been out, I think it was something like May 12th or May 10th. He was planning on pulling out the troops out of Afghanistan. Currently, we still have them there. We're waiting. Apparently, we're going to get them all pulled out by 9/11, hopefully. We'll see what ends up happening in the region because, we just have missiles being shot back and forth between Israel and Hamas, so who knows really what's going to happen there. So next he goes on, he explains this qualified negative, president to veto bills, and then, once again, he compares it to the King of Great Britain, who can just automatically, he had the absolute negative power, meaning he can say, I veto this bill, and that's it. There's no recourse. He can't be overpowered by the parliament. There is no way to beat his veto. He just goes out there and says, listen, it's not getting passed because I said so. So you had a lot of power established in that central government in the executive branch over in Great Britain, the king. He had a lot more power. And it's not even close. It's such a dishonest comparison to even make to begin with. So that's really the reason why Hamilton has to go through all of this, because his objectors were characterizing the President of the United States was to have far too much power. So next he goes on. He states, and I quote, "The qualified negative of the President differs widely from the absolute negative of the British sovereign and tallies exactly with the revisionary authority of the Council of Revision of this state, of which the governor is a constituent part. In this respect, the power of the president would exceed that of the governor of New York, because the former would possess singly what the latter shares with the chancellor and judges, but it would be precisely the same with that of the governor of Massachusetts, whose constitution as to this article seems to have been the original from which the convention hath copied." End quote. So the Massachusetts is where the convention kind of copied the Constitution from, their constitution, their state constitution in Massachusetts. And more interestingly, the way that these veto powers worked in New York is there was a council with the chancellor and judges. And I don't know exactly how many people were made up in this, how much this council, how many people it was comprised of. But the governor got one vote in that council, so really he didn't have that much power in terms of vetoing any type of legislation. So he continues, Hamilton, to illustrate the powers of the president. And he states, and I quote, the president is the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states. When called into the actual service of the United States, he is to have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment, to recommend to the consideration of Congress such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient, to convene on extraordinary occasions both houses of the legislature or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, to adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and to commission all officers of the United States. End quote. So that's a lot to handle there. Commissioning, taking care of the laws faithfully executed, meaning enforcing the law. That's pretty simple. He's commissioning all the officers of the United States. I think that has something to do somewhat with swearing in or selecting the officers that are in the executive branch, the officers that are to enforce the law and to kind of handle some of these foreign affairs, which is known. He nominates them, then they have to get approved by the Senate. He's commander-in-chief of the military. Pretty simple. And the one that people miss a lot of the time is the militia. The militia actually has to be called upon by the Senate. But once the Senate, or I think it's by the Senate. I know it's by the Congress, but I think it's specifically by the Senate. And once the Senate calls upon the militia, I know it's somewhere written in here. I'll find it eventually. Once they call upon the militia, then the president kind of has the power to say, okay, go there, go there. They're almost like the battlefield expert. And that's the reason why we elected, as the first president, there was an election of George Washington. I don't even think anyone ran against him. He's the only independent to ever win the presidency. And at the very end of his presidency, he actually kind of went on a little rant talking about how party politics is going to destroy the country, which he's partially right. Now, in these papers, they mention parties. Like there's going to be multiple parties. They could never imagine that there would be really just two parties. There's the Libertarian Party, but they're a non-factor. You pretty much just have two parties, and that's it. They were never estimating that to happen. They just did not foreshadow that. They foreshadowed, being multiple parties, and the reason, and in a way, it also being a good thing if there was multiple parties, because then the power is kind of decentralized in a way, and there's not the majority beating down on the minority in those cases. So, what does he have next to say? The president shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons, except in cases of impeachment. Yeah, he mentioned that. So, impeachment, obviously, so he wouldn't do the old cover your ass deal. He can, you saw Trump, I think he gave Roger Stone a pardon, I believe, as well as Mike Flynn. I don't know if he gave Roger. I know he did Mike Flynn, and good thing he did, because if he lost the election, right? So, if he lost the election in this case, then you'd have Mike Flynn probably be in prison right now, because the left wing, the Democrats, the communists, all they care about is power. All they care about is punishing their political opponents, just like they're going after Trump currently in New York. Hamilton details that the president, and I quote, will only have the occasional command of such part of the militia of the nation as by legislative provision may be called into the actual service of the Union. End quote. Yeah, so maybe it isn't the Senate, maybe it's the House and the Senate, but I thought it was the Senate. Maybe it's just the Congress in a general sense have to call upon the militia, which I don't even know how that would really work. They would never call upon the militia nowadays. That would never happen. Opposed to the governor of New York and the King of Great Britain, they have full control of all the militia within their several jurisdictions. As the commander-in-chief, the president has less power than the monarch of Great Britain. Yeah, so, and as well as New York. New York, actually, the governor had all the power to call upon the militia, which was very interesting now that you think about, oh my God, there was a New York militia, there was a New Jersey, there was a militia in every single state, and really what it was free Americans that had the right to bear arms, that felt a need to defend their state and defend their country. That's all it really simply was. And you had that as well going on in Great Britain, but you had the king over there had all the power to do whatever he wanted with the military. So in this case, the president actually had less power than the two of them. Now, in order to declare war, raise and regulate armies and fleets, the president would have to concede to the whims of the legislature, whereas the monarch can do it seamlessly without any type of approval. Now, the power in respect to pardons is less than that of the governor of New York. He is, by the constitution of the state, able to pardon even in cases of impeachment, except for treason and murder. The president of the Union cannot pardon an offender from the effects of impeachment. So, yeah, in a way, you had, for murder and treason, and the president pretty much could do anything, but he couldn't do impeachment, but New York somehow could do impeachment. It was very kind of weird. It's a little dicey. So he goes on, he states, and I quote, "In most of these particulars, the power of the president will resemble equally that of the King of Great Britain and the Governor of New York. The most material points of difference are these. First, the president will have only the occasional command of such part of the militia of the nation as by legislative provision may be called into the actual service of the Union. The King of Great Britain and the Governor of New York have at all times the entire command of all the militia within their several jurisdictions. In this article, therefore, the power of the president would be inferior to that of either the monarch or the governor," which I mentioned before. So he goes on. Secondly, he states, and I quote, "The president is to be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. In this respect, his authority would be nominally the same with that of the King of Great Britain, but in substance much inferior to it. It would amount to nothing more than the supreme command and direction of the military and naval forces, as first general and admiral of the Confederacy, while that of the British King extends to the declaring of war and to the raising and regulating of fleets and armies, all which, by the Constitution under consideration, would appertain to the legislature. The Governor of New York, on the other hand, is by the Constitution of the state vested only with the command of its militia and navy." End quote. This is where he lays it all out. So the regulating, the raising of fleets, declaring of war, the king could do all of that with his power. Now, in the case of the president couldn't do any of that. He would need some sort of approval of the legislative branch and the legislative body. And then the governor of New York, on the other hand, he had the command of, I guess, the militia and the navy of New York in this case. So the Constitution and states didn't really declare war, so there really wasn't any power written on that, I'm assuming. The Constitution defines the offense of treason, and I quote, "levying war upon the United States and adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort," end quote. Which I thought that was kind of interesting. And then they go on to explain how the president is to have the power to make treaties, provided that 2/3 of the senators present agree. Whereas the King of Great Britain has the sole power as an absolute representative of the nation in all foreign transactions. So he could just start a treaty whenever he wanted with whoever he wanted. He didn't have to answer to anybody, whereas the president needed the confirmation of 2/3 of the senators. So he goes on. He states, and I quote, "Therefore, there is no comparison between the intended power of the president and the actual power of the British sovereign," which means the king. "The president is also to be authorized to receive ambassadors and other public ministers." And then Hamilton kind of characterizes this power. "Though it has been a rich theme of declamation, is more a matter of dignity than of authority," end quote. And what he means the dignity than of authority is you got to give this guy the dignity at least to be able to nominate his own ambassadors, public ministers, because they kind of fall under the executive branch. Ambassadors are under the Secretary of State. Public ministers, there's many different types of public ministers, but similarly, they are both representative of the executive branch and their powers. So Hamilton adds, though, and I quote, and this is the important part, "The president is to nominate and, with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors and other public ministers, judges of the Supreme Court, and in general all officers of the United States established by law and whose appointment are not otherwise provided for by the Constitution," end quote. So this used to kind of be, the Supreme Court used to be, I think you needed, because of the filibuster. They had the filibuster in the Supreme Court. I don't know if they lifted that for that power in general, but it used to have to be at least 60% of the vote. You have to have 60 senators. Now it's only a majority of the vote in the Senate to approve a Supreme Court justice, which I don't know exactly when the Democrats are going to go for all of this. The Democrats right now, what I see is they're all talking about Trump still, even though he isn't the president, because they're trying to cover up right now for the Biden administration how terribly bad it's going thus far. I've yet to see any of these liberals really come out and gladly, propagate Joe Biden as some great founder of equality or anything special or a great economy. So we're going to see what happens with that. I mean, I've seen these people, and it's pathetic, really. To be on the left is like the most pathetic, gutless thing to do. You don't take a stand on anything. I've seen people that are Jewish that won't post anything about Palestine shooting missiles indiscriminately at Jews over in Israel. Also, you got to remember, Palestine's the crowd that was out there cheering when our towers were taken down on 9/11. They were out in the streets gladly cheering. We had a loss of more than 3,000 people, where people that were on the 80th floor of the World Towers were jumping because they didn't want to burn alive because it was that hot and they didn't want to get incinerated in the heat. You had people that were in Palestine out there dancing. So we have these people that are on the left that are Jewish that won't say anything about Palestine, won't say anything about Hamas, won't say anything about Islamic terrorism in the region over there, but they're very quick to condemn Marjorie Taylor Greene for drawing the comparison of wearing a mask to how during the Holocaust the Nazis used to make Jews wear stars on them, and having wearing a mask and having these COVID passports is similar to that. Which, yes, it's a terrible comparison. In a general sense, World War II. Talking about the Nazis, talking about Germany in World War II in a general sense is always a bad comparison because it's nowhere near as bad, always. And that's from when the left does it, when the right does it, when the left calls Trump and all conservatives and Republicans Hitler and Nazis, that's terrible. And then as well as when Marjorie Taylor Greene does it, it's also pretty bad. But you have lefties that are Jewish that see all of these attacks. They have nothing to say about any of that. They won't speak out. So we have the ramifications of these attacks are death. People are dying. Marjorie Taylor Greene comes out there and says something stupid like that. Guess what happens, folks? Nothing. It's just a news story. No one's dying. There's people getting beat up, getting mugged in the streets in the United States of America, and it has nothing to do with what Marjorie Taylor Greene said. It has to do with the region over in Israel and the fighting that's going on there in Islamic terrorism and jihad. But these leftist Jews in America are almost like they're like not connected to reality. They're not connected to what's going on over in Israel. So they take the very weak stance of condemning Marjorie Taylor Greene because it's much easier for them because then they don't get challenged. To be a leftist is easy. You don't get challenged by anybody. It's a giant echo chamber. You do not get challenged. You can say whatever you want as long as it is with the ideology of the left and it extols whatever the left wants you to. It's so gutless that people they care about words, they care about tweets, and then on the other hand they don't care about actual death and actual war and actual missiles being shot indiscriminately towards civilian populations. It's pathetic, and it's easy to take that position because everyone's going to like you if you take that position. So, let's go on here. Hamilton, he adds, and I quote, the president, I already hit that one. So next he goes on. He states, and he's talking about the King of Great Britain. The King of Great Britain is emphatically and truly styled the Fountain of Honor. He not only appoints to all offices, but can create offices. He can confer titles of nobility at pleasure, and has the disposal of an immense number of church preferments. There is evidently a great inferiority in the power of the president in this particular to that of the British king, nor is it equal to that of the governor of New York. If we are to interpret the meaning of the Constitution of the state by the practice which has obtained under it, the power of appointment is with us lodged in a council composed of the governor and 4 members of the Senate chosen by the Assembly. End quote. So this is kind of interesting. So the governor of New York, obviously King of Great Britain, he can do anything. He can create offices. He can appoint offices. He can do pretty much whatever he wants. He confers titles of nobility. he has all the powers, okay? So the president is greatly inferior to this. Now, in comparison to the governor of New York, the governor of New York can nominate these offices, just like the president can. But when it comes to the power of appointing, he's also lodged, the governor of New York, in the council for the approval, which is comprised, I think he says, of 5 people, if I read that correctly. Composed of the governor, yes. So you have 4 members of the Senate in New York, and then you also have the governor. So the governor even has a vote in the confirmation of his officials, which then gives him more power than the president, because the president has no power in confirming. So there's evident inferiority in the president as compared to Great Britain in this regard. The king has the power to appoint all offices and create new ones, grant titles of nobility at will, and can appoint in the church as well. Now, Hamilton details the governor of New York appoints through his own nomination in secrecy, with at most 4 New York council members, more often 2 to make the appointment, meaning, 2, I guess, if the other ones didn't show up. And the governor has a deciding vote in appointment as well, because he's on that council. Now, all things considered, Hamilton concludes that with the exception of the concurrent authority of the president to make treaties, it is difficult to determine that the president possesses more or less power than the governor of New York. And unequivocally, there is no parallel to be drawn to the power of the president and the monarch of Great Britain. Yes, so, and making treaties, I don't think New York really made treaties either. Because especially with this new constitution, you couldn't have specific states making treaties. I mean, at this time, Confederation of America, under the Articles of Confederation, yeah, the states could probably do that. So he goes on, he states, and I quote, "Hence it appears that, except as to the concurrent authority of the president in the Article of Treaties, it would be difficult to determine whether that magistrate would, in the aggregate, possess more or less power than the governor of New York, and it appears yet more unequivocally that there is no pretense for the parallel which has been attempted between him and the King of Great Britain." So Hamilton, he ends the paper. Oh wow, I'm surprised I made it through all this. He ends the paper actually going through a quick summation of it. I'm going to go through it in 2 different quotes because it's a really long paragraph, but he just kind of goes through a summation, a quick recap of everything put together of the powers compared to New York governor as well as the King of Great Britain. So he states, and I quote, "The President of the United States would be an officer elected by the people for 4 years. The King of Great Britain is a perpetual and hereditary prince. The one would be amenable to personal punishment and disgrace. The person of the other is sacred and inviolable. The one would have a qualified negative upon the acts of the legislative body. The other has an absolute negative. The one would have a right to command the military and naval forces of the nation. The other, in addition to this right, possesses that of declaring war and of raising and regulating fleets and armies by his own authority. The one would have a concurrent power with a branch of the legislature in formation of treaties. The other is the sole possessor of the power of making treaties. The one would have a like concurrent authority in appointing to offices. The other is the sole author of all appointments, including the offices." So actually, this one, I think he just goes through, he just compares Great Britain, the king, and the president. So he goes on. He states, and I quote, "The one can confer no privileges whatever." Now that's meaning the president, meaning he can't grant titles of nobility. So the other can make denizens of aliens, noblemen of commoners, can erect corporations with all the rights incident to corporate bodies. The one can prescribe no rules concerning the commerce or currency of the nation, as in the president. The other, as in the king, is in several respects the arbiter of commerce, and in this capacity can establish markets and fairs, can regulate weights and measures, can lay embargoes for a limited time, can coin money, can authorize or prohibit the circulation of foreign coins. So all those things are kind of the power of the legislative branch. So the one, now referring to the president again, has no particle of spiritual jurisdiction. The other is the supreme head and governor of the national church. What answer shall we give to those who would persuade us that things so unlike resemble each other, the same that ought to be given to those who tell us that a government, the whole power of which would be in the hands of the elective and periodical servants of the people, is an aristocracy, a monarchy, and a despotism. End quote. So that's just him pretty much ripping the objectors, saying they're idiots. That would think that the two of them, that you can even draw any type of similarities between the two of them as if they're tantamount to each other. So that'll actually conclude this one. I greatly appreciate everyone tuning in. As always, I kept it around 30 minutes, so I tried my best on this one. I know it's long. The next one's probably going to be longer. It might take up to 40 on that one. I've been trying to keep it around, 20, 30 minutes. I don't want to take too much of your time. So I greatly appreciate everyone for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, let people know about the podcast, drop the mic, and I will see you all next time. Thank you.